Greene for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Chief Modlin. Thank you for Chief Chavez for coming in and speaking with us today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about unaccompanied minors. I'm sure this is a very serious situation that you're familiar with. Under the Trump administration, with Title 42, can you tell me when you had unaccompanied minors, what would happen to those children?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. So before or after Title 42, so my point is Title 42 did not affect how we deal with unaccompanied children. We do not expel unaccompanied children. So when unaccompanied children are encountered, they're brought into our custody. We make sure they get any medical attention they need, showers, change of clothes, all of that. And then they're turned over to HHS's ORR within 72 hours.
And that's how it's handled right now under the Biden administration?
That's how it's been handled for as long as I've been handling unaccompanied children, ma'am.
And were they sent back to their home countries before the Biden administration?
Not to my knowledge. But again, ma'am, what I would say is, again, that's much further down the process than where the Border Patrol is. So once we encounter them, whether it was 3 or 4 years ago or yesterday, they're brought into our custody, assessed, and then eventually turned over to ORR. Where they end up, that's much longer after we have them.
Many of them were sent back to their home countries before under Trump's administration. I want to talk to you a minute about, are you familiar with, there was a 20-year-old autistic woman in Maryland who was strangled to death by an illegal alien here, 17-year-old MS-13 gang member. Under the program as it is right now, many of the MS-13 gang members are being brought in the country as unaccompanied minors. They're very young. They're under 18, and then their numbers have doubled, maybe tripled in our country. What have you seen with that?
Again, ma'am, thanks for the question. My personal experience in the 2 years I've been in the Tucson sector, I'm unaware of any significant amount of MS-13 gang members within the unaccompanied children population.
Well, how are you able to know if they're gang members or not? Do you have an MS-13 gang database that you're able to search them up in there and somehow find out if they're gang members or not?
So, ma'am, with our agents that have a significant amount of training and experience, there are things they look for. There are certainly, as you know, you've probably seen photographs of MS-13 gang members with significant amount of tattoos. Sometimes it's simply an admission of it. Sometimes it may be other things that trigger agents to start questioning.
Right, but Chief Modlin, they may not have had all their tattoos yet, being that they're young and under 18. Being 15 or 16-year-old. As a matter of fact, they are coming in the country at a much higher rate. That's why this 20-year-old autistic woman was killed, because of an illegal alien, a 17-year-old MS-13 gang member, and she'd be alive today if our border was secure. One of my Democrat colleagues was talking about the wall as if it doesn't work. I assure you that the Democrats believe in walls because they've erected one around the Capitol today because President Joe Biden is delivering his State of the Union address to the country. Walls do work, and we want you to have a wall as one of the toolkits in your box to stop the illegal invasion into our country that's occurring every single day. Are you aware of how many fentanyl deaths that the percentage increase in my home state of Georgia?
Ma'am, I'm unaware.
Well, I'll just let you know, fentanyl deaths have increased to 350% in Georgia. We're not a border state. We're not along the southern border, but fentanyl deaths have gone up 350%. Are you aware of how much money the Mexican cartels make selling fentanyl, or what their industry makes?
Ma'am, again, thank you. So what I do know is that the cartels are making billions, and whether it's fentanyl, whether it's moving people across the border, everything's a commodity to them. And to your point earlier, you not being a border state, it has been said many times, and I completely agree, that every state is a border state, ma'am. Everything that happens on the border affects the entirety of the country.
Absolutely, and that's why a young lady in Maryland should be alive today, because our border should be secure. It's a $20 billion industry, the cartels have, $20 billion. And that's because our border is not secure. Now, we appreciate the job that you do, both of you, and we're thankful for you, but we are completely against the policies of the Biden administration that's allowing the murder of over 300 Americans a day from fentanyl, allowing the Mexican cartels to illegally make over $20 billion, and allow our country to be invaded every single day. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
Mr. Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roth, please explain to us why Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene, or the representative from Georgia, was removed from Twitter.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. My recollection is that her personal account was banned from Twitter after repeated written notices due to repeated violations of the Twitter rules.
Can you add a little specificity to the violation of the Twitter rules?
Yes. Again, I didn't have access to my Twitter email, documents, anything that would have let me prepare to answer that in more detail, but my recollection is that the Congresswoman repeatedly violated Twitter's policies about sharing misinformation about COVID-19. She received multiple written warnings about that conduct. She received multiple timeouts related to that conduct. And then ultimately, consistent with the written and published policy, those repeated violations resulted in her account being permanently suspended.
Mr. Chairman,
so in essence,
I'd like to take a point of personal privilege.
that it's still my time.
We'll stop
Still my
clock.
It's still my time.
Mr. Chairman.
The
Point of
reason
order
why-
by Mr. Raskins.
Yeah, I don't believe that members of this committee have the right to interrupt someone's testimony because their
Point
name
of
was
personal
mentioned.
privilege.
And-
You were mentioning my name, Mr. Raskin.
Yeah, no, I understand, but that's not the rule, Ms. Green. I don't think a member.
That is the rule in Congress.
Well, then I'd like
we
a-
can
I'd-
take a point
I'd like
of
the
personal
parliamentarian to
privilege.
rule on whether any member of this committee has the right to interrupt a witness's testimony because they mentioned the name of a member of Congress.
You mentioned my name, Mr. Raskin.
Yeah, I'm not testifying.
Chair recognizes Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr.
For your
Chairman.
point of privilege, very
Thank-
briefly.
Thank you. For Mr. Roth, who made you in charge of what is true and what's not true?
We'll,
Does she get to reopen her
no,
question?
no,
Okay.
we'll go back to Mr. Gomez, and Mr. Gomez, please remember the decorum of the committee. The clock, we'll restart the clock now. You didn't lose any time. Chair recognizes Mr. Gomez.
Thank you so much. The gentle lady from Georgia was suspended from Twitter for knowingly and consistently spreading conspiracy theories about COVID-19 vaccine, right? Which is shameful, especially in a pandemic where a million people have lost their lives. With that, I yield my rest of my time to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Let's talk about the so-called Twitter files, which my Republican colleagues seem to think are God's gift to journalism. In one about the Hunter Biden laptop, the author says that every single fact in the New York Post story was accurate. And Chairman Comer, I notice you blew up the cover of that New York Post story, which I appreciate you doing that because I'd like to dig into this article. The very first paragraph says Hunter Biden introduced his father to a top executive at a Ukrainian energy firm less than a year before the elder Biden pressured government officials in Ukraine into firing a prosecutor who was investigating the company. That is false. 100% false.
Is the gentleman sure about that?
Yes, in fact, I am sure about that, and as the lead counsel in the first impeachment investigation, we proved that he was actually fired because he was not prosecuting corruption, not that he was fired because he was prosecuting corruption.
Corruption of the president's son's company. I'm sorry, would the gentleman yield corruption of the president's son's company?
I'd like to reclaim my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
The fact that Joe Biden fired, consistent with U.S. policy and every single European country, the prosecutor general in Ukraine because he did not prosecute corruption, including at companies like Burisma, has been proven over and over and over. And if you want to know who actually prosecuted Burisma, Chairman Comer, you should talk to the British authorities, because they were the ones who were prosecuting Burisma, and they couldn't get any cooperation from the Ukrainian prosecutor general. So that's why he was fired. So right off the top, the very first paragraph of this so-called bombshell story is completely false. Now, what is the allegation that we are hearing from our Republican colleagues about the connection to Joe Biden and Burisma? It is an email from a Burisma employee thanking Hunter Biden for organizing a meeting with the Vice President Biden. We know nothing about the substance of that meeting. We know nothing about how long they met. It was not on Vice President Biden's schedule. And in fact, I would ask my Republican colleagues, do you meet with foreign businessmen? Do you meet with foreign diplomats? If we were to say to you every single time you met with somebody that you discussed something that you're voting on, how would you react? It's preposterous. And Chairman Comer, you have said in your opening statement that Joe Biden lied to the American people. That is a bold, bold accusation. And so far, we've seen no actual evidence of any lies or any support for Joe Biden being involved in anything having to do with Ukraine other than promoting U.S. foreign policy. And I hope that you are not abusing the power as chairman of this committee, and that you are not wasting taxpayer dollars on a fishing expedition into a civilian child of a president for political purposes. I yield back.
The gentleman yield.
How long are you going to continue this outrage, complete outrage, where China is poisoning America's children, poisoning our teenagers, poisoning our young people? How long are you going to let this go on?
Congresswoman, let me assure you that we're not letting it go on. We are fighting this.
No, I reclaim my time. You're a liar. You are letting this go on, and the numbers prove it. You can't lie about the facts, Secretary Mayorkas. While you live in denial and sit over there with this attitude that you're doing everything right, you are killing Americans with your policies. And that is a fact. Your policies are killing people, over 300 Americans a day, over 300, and it's outrageous. Let me ask you another question. We talk about
the ranking member is recognized.
You know, we can disagree, but just the fact that we have people watching, you don't have to call a witness a liar. And I just...
Excuse me, does the ranking member have a point of order?
Well,
No, obviously.
actually, I want you to take the words of the speaker down.
So,
But I need to explain.
so the gentleman does have is
Yes.
raising a point
Yes.
of order.
So the point is, in raising this point of order,
And Joan Lady's time will be restored.
you know, we have a history of being a bipartisan committee that work on solutions. Now, we can disagree, but we've gotten to the point of the language that we're using is not the kind of language that historically we, as members of this committee, we've used. And again, I just think in the interest of civility of this committee, I would implore all of the members that I understand the strength and concern, but, you know, there's a way that we ought to conduct ourselves. And what I'm hearing is not how a majority of this committee conducts business, and we can do better. So I ask that the words be taken down.
Committee will suspend. The gentleman will state the words that he wishes to be taken down.
The gentlelady referenced the secretary and called him a liar.
Chair asks the gentlelady if she wishes to seek unanimous consent to modify or withdraw her remarks.
I will not withdraw my remarks because the facts show the proof.
Okay. Yeah.
So in making a ruling on this, it's pretty clear that the rules state you can't impugn someone's character. Identifying or calling someone a liar is unacceptable in this committee. And I make the ruling that we strike those words.
Sorry, just a point of order, it's a legitimate question.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you move to take the words down or to strike them, Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, sorry, I just stepped in. Point of
Yeah,
order.
take them down.
So
That's what we did.
Yeah.
my understanding is if words are taken down, that means that the member can no longer speak in whatever the proceeding is that those words were said.
Personal inquiry, point of personal inquiry.
There's no such thing.
Stand by just a second. So in consulting the rules of the House, when we strike, it does terminate the time of the individual who is speaking. So the gentlelady is no longer recognized. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ivey, I believe.
Can I make a point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman?
You can.
So the ruling was that because she used the word liar, that was taken down, which I agree with.
Yes.
But accusing
A statement of fact is very similar to the posters that Mr.
There's no statement of fact.
There's no statement of fact.
Bullshit.
There's no
statement of
factual
fact.
basis for the statement.
We're not here to debate this, okay? And the ruling was made by the chair that these previous words were not against the rules of Clause 1 and Clause 4 of Rule 17. But to tell someone that they are a liar is, it's pretty clear in the rules.
Slander is clearly covered by the rules. The impugnment, I can't imagine an allegation worse than the one that she just made. I mean, that has got to be in the category of taking the words down.
No, it is not. It does not fit the rules by the ruling of the chair. And we've already voted on that. It is past us. We have the secretary until about 1:30. We're going to move on. And Mr. Ivey, you're recognized for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I have no questions.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but I would like to suggest that this amendment, which applies an automatic death sentence to anyone who imports any amount of fentanyl-type drugs, so long as it comes across the southern border, is not a serious or rational response to a very serious problem. I mean, we've had, at the port in Philadelphia a couple years ago, we had 110 pounds of fentanyl seized, and it came through the port of Philadelphia. So the fact that there would be this bizarre distinction between the southern border and the other ports where 90% of the fentanyl is coming in doesn't make any sense. On the off chance this is supposed to be a serious amendment and not just clickbait for social media or campaign donations, I would offer the following points for consideration.
Nothing is for clickbait
It's
or
my time.
campaign donation.
First of all, the amendment's unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has been clear that the death penalty is a violation of the Eighth Amendment in circumstances where death was not the immediate result of the violation in question. This law contains no such limitations as to seriousness, and what the court said there, and I think it's instructive, is that when the law punishes by death, it risks its own sudden descent into brutality, transgressing the constitutional commitment to decency and restraint. Second, it would have the absurd result that you've got a mandatory death penalty for someone who brings a pill with fentanyl across the southern border, but not for someone who imports hundreds of pounds of fentanyl anywhere else in the country. Third, it imposes a mandatory minimum sentence of death. We've had a lot of conversations, and granted, it was before you came to testify today. We've had a lot of conversations here today about the validity or the use of mandatory minimum sentences, but this would be the first and only mandatory minimum sentence in U.S. history. And none of the other offenses that you cited have a minimum sentence of death regardless of the circumstances. It's always a maximum. So I obviously can't support this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Would you like to respond to any of that?
Yes, absolutely, I would. First of all, this is not for campaign donations or clickbait, like what you said would be for campaign donations and clickbait, and I find that offensive. Secondly, the amendment reads, any person who knowingly or intentionally imports fentanyl. And I would think that you would care about 300 Americans dying every single day, especially young people. But I do agree with you, it shouldn't be just across the southern border, it should be anywhere across our border, and it should be punishable, again, by death. And as far as the death penalty being constitutional, there's 41 capital offenses that are punishable by death, so clearly, murder is punishable by death, and murdering 300 Americans every single day, knowingly and willfully, should be punished by death. Thank you.
I yield back. Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you very much. And I think that the key distinction, as pointed out in the Supreme Court opinions, was whether the importation is tied to the murder. And it's this time that is key. And I think that that's what you were pointing out. Do you want to add anything else to that?
No, just that is the point, is that there are no limitations on what's been proposed here, other than it has to be an importation across the southern border. No limitations as to harm caused, personal use, anything else. Obviously, none of us here want to encourage the importation of fentanyl, but also we don't want to encourage the descent of our laws into brutality and transgressing the constitutional commitment to decency and restraint.
Right, and as I point out, that none of those crimes that you listed have a mandatory minimum. And I really want to go back on the record and point out that under the Biden administration, we have been steadfast at attacking fentanyl. Nobody, no Democrat on this committee has said that we are in any way, supportive of any kind of fentanyl. We indeed are insistent that the problem with this bill is it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't go far enough. Our communities want us to do more with regards to enforcement. They want us to do more with regards to treatment. And that's what we need to do, is we need to do more. This bill doesn't do enough. So with that, I yield back. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And would you like to respond to the last comments?
Yes, thank you very much. I think if Democrats really cared about stopping fentanyl and cared at all about Americans being murdered, 300 every single day, due to Biden administration failed border policies and the national security crisis that the Biden administration has created, you all would have voted for H.R. 1, our very strong bill, and our border security package, increasing American energy, but also protecting America's border, helps America's national security. And our border security package brings back Trump's administration border policies. And Joe Biden, through executive orders, wrecked all of those. And that's why we have over 300 Americans dying every single day. You talk about what is humane and decent in treating people. That would be protecting our southern border and stopping people from knowingly and intentionally importing fentanyl that, again, is a poison that comes from China. If Joe Biden cared about saving American lives, he would be strict on China and the amount of fentanyl that they're bringing in and just handing over, selling to the Mexican cartels. If Joe Biden cared about saving American lives, 300 American lives every single day, every day, it's like a bomb going off and 300 Americans dying, then Joe Biden would do something about the Mexican cartels who are basically running 5 out of 9 border sectors across our southern border. If Joe Biden cared at all about these 300 Americans, who, by the way, most of them are under the age of 45, then Joe Biden would absolutely be working with our speaker in this debt ceiling negotiation and making our border security package part of that negotiation. But clearly Joe Biden doesn't care at all, and the Democrats don't care at all about border security or 300 people that die every single day. Thank you.
Professor Turley, let me come back to you, and I thought I'd pulled up your testimony here, but it goes to the question I raised when I was making my opening statement, which was that you'd raised the issue. Oh, I'm sorry, it's page 18 of your testimony. disinformation does cause divisions, but the solution is not to embrace government corporate censorship, I'm sorry. So what would be the types of solutions we're looking at? And I'll just off Dr. Miller Idris's statement, for example, a new phenomenon apparently is people, I guess when I was a kid, you know, they would pull the fire alarm. Now they're making calls and saying that there's an active shooter at elementary school X. And because of the networking that everything has now, that gets picked up by the police and EMT and frightened parents, news media, even though it's false. So one example, I mean, there's multiple others. We could talk about the recruitment videos and the like, and you might have gradations of those, but I mean, what would be your take on how we should be addressing these kinds of issues?
Thank you very much for that question. I actually think there is a lot of common ground there in terms of what we can do positively to deal with disinformation. Disinformation is a real thing. It is a thing that people go on the internet. It seems to be a license for people, and in an age of rage, that license can be truly horrific when you look at how people transform themselves on the internet. What I would stress is that the government should not be in the business of censorship. That's a bright line that the government can live with. Instead, it should focus on producing better information and to have offices that can counter, because remember, the courts have accepted that, the Supreme Court has said the government doesn't have to be neutral on information. When it speaks, it's allowed to take a side. It's allowed to say what it believes is true.
Well, but let's follow up on that. So I, as government official, learned that there's no active shooter at that elementary school. And I've, call YouTube, Twitter, whoever, and say, hey, look, that's false information. You're scaring parents to death. Can you take that down?
Well, first of all, that example you gave may indeed be a crime under state law to make false claims of that kind with the purpose of triggering panic. But more importantly, one of the things that can be done is that the social media companies and the government can immediately flag information they believe is untrue and speak in their own voice. What I think we need to develop, and I think there's a lot of room there to develop it, is to try to create better guardrails that keeps the U.S. government on this side of censorship, and that includes the use of agencies, the use of private companies, in my view, do trigger the First Amendment. I think that the government has actually violated First Amendment.
Since I'm running out of time, there was something else I wanted to raise. I'll have to come back to you all in the next round. You did mention Nina Jankowicz in your statement, who I had a chance to meet during a deposition in the Judiciary Committee, and I've started following her and what happened with respect to her. She was the person, as you may recall, who was appointed to head that board. As it turned out, she was essentially forced out of the position before it was even formed. And I'll offer a couple of articles here that can be put into the record, but there's an individual named Jack Posobiec, I guess his name is, who put out arguably false information about her that got picked up by Chairman Jordan and others. Actually, I think Ms. Taylor Greene had some comments with respect to it. We can put them in the record. I think Mr. Gates did as well. That sort of escalated into her getting death threats. She had to hire a security company. She was 8 months pregnant.
Parliamentary question, Mr. Chairman.
I didn't say that you...
He mentioned my name and accused me of saying false information about Nina Jankowicz.
And then you'll be, the committee will be at ease.
Can we pause the clock?
Yeah, please do. In fact, put 20 seconds back on the clock, please.
Yeah.
Committee will suspend. Members are reminded not to engage in personalities, and the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. But members of Congress made comments about her that took on a life of their own. They became viral on the internet, led to the death threats that she got, and still gets, actually, even though she's been out of the position for about a year at least. And I think she's filing a lawsuit against Fox for propagating these stories as well. But, you know, she was clearly a victim of, in my view, misinformation, disinformation. You know, and from her perspective, it was very ironic because that's what she was actually brought into the government to try and address. So I'll come back to it later, but thank you, Professor Turley, for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really know where to begin. So we're going to start with a few questions. I got a little quiz for y'all. So we've been talking about the right to vote. I just need a yes or no from each of the witnesses, and we'll start with Ms. Weiser. Is voting a constitutionally protected federal right?
Yes, it's constitutionally protected through multiple provisions.
Okay. Ms. Evans, yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Spies, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mr. Cucciolini, yes or no?
It is constitutionally protected.
Okay, thank you. We've heard a lot of talk today about things such as buying alcohol. Ms. Weiser, is alcohol a federally protected constitutional right?
It is not.
Ms. Evans?
It is not.
Mr. Spies?
No.
Mr. Cucciolini?
Cuccinelli. You need an ID to buy it, but no.
Okay, all right. And finally, we like to talk about guns, or at least some people in this building love to talk about guns. Guns, is there an amendment dealing with guns in our federal Constitution?
Yes.
Ms. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Spies?
Spies, yes.
Spies. And yes, sir.
Yes, there is, and you need an ID to buy it.
Okay, so let's talk about it. So I hail from the great state of Texas, and what's interesting to me is we always want to talk about privileges and compare what is required for a privilege versus comparing what is required for a constitutionally protected right under our federal Constitution. And it's interesting that in this chamber, we love to talk about the Second Amendment, and we want to make sure that everyone has guns, and we only have one amendment in our Constitution that deals with guns, and it's the Second Amendment. And Professor Weiser, you were just about to say we have multiple provisions, so you were messing up my test a little bit. So I'm not gonna let you answer the question. I'm gonna go down here to these experts. Let's start and go the other way. Do we know how many amendments actually address voting in our Constitution?
Well, it depends how you count them, but you could say 3, 5th,
Okay.
14th, 15th,
Okay. Mr. Spies?
plus the DC amendments.
And maybe first.
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, Professor, go ahead and break it down.
I believe it's 6.
There we go, there we go. So we got the 14th, we got the 15th, 17th, wait a minute, did I mess up? 19th, 24th, and 26th. There we go. All right, so we have 6 amendments.
23rd.
And every time we dealt with an amendment dealing with voting, we were expanding upon access. Is that not correct?
That is correct. That is the history of this country. Expanding
Okay.
access.
The history is to expand, but obviously there are some folk that want to rewrite history and make sure we go back in time. So let's also talk a little bit more about history for a couple of seconds. There was this little thing called the Voting Rights Act. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Are you also familiar with this thing called Bloody Sunday?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so are you familiar with the fact that there are black folk that died in this country to make sure that black folk had access to the ballot box?
Yes, that is correct.
Are you also familiar with the fact that probably around 1913 or sometime around there was maybe a women's suffrage march?
Yes, yes.
And that was a fight, again, for women to have access to the ballot box, was it not?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so we have had throughout history these fights to make sure that everyone is accessing the ballot box, but seemingly when it comes down to, say, guns in this country, which are the #1 killer of children in this country, we haven't had half as many hearings about guns as we've had on voting rights, and every time we seemingly have a hearing on voting rights, we talking about the fact that people are cheating. So let's talk about who's cheating. I got a few articles. Are you familiar with the fact that there was recently a settlement with this little news company called Fox News?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That was for about $780-something million. Was it because they were lying about the elections?
Yes, it was for a.
Okay, there we go. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to keep going. There also was this article, because I don't want us to base anything on Georgia at all. Please, Jesus, not Georgia. Okay, because Georgia purged 87,000.
Will the gentlewoman
that
yield?
should
I
not-
think
will
Georgia
not-
matters.
I will not yield. I am reclaiming my time. All right, so there were 87,000 people that were purged that were legitimate voters. So no, we don't want to copy off of Georgia. Also, another GOP voter admits he committed fraud. Another one in Pennsylvania, man who admits he voted for Trump with his dead mom's name because he listened to too much propaganda.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
And that concludes our questions. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to yield to the much improved ranking member, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez from New York, for a closing statement.
I'll take the gold star. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank our witnesses here today. Once again, we acknowledge fully that this is not easy and that your respect, your service and your public service here is respected and acknowledged and valued. So thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I think it is important for us to, summarize much of what we heard and saw today. And overall, what this matter is about. A U.S. attorney, handpicked by Attorney General Barr, has for 4 years investigated, together with a dozen agents and at least 4 prosecutors from his office and the tax division of the Department of Justice, the son of President Biden. Hunter Biden has been charged with a felony and misdemeanors, and 2 misdemeanors, and he is pleading guilty to several crimes and submitting to sentencing by an appointed judge, a Trump-appointed judge. However, we are also seeing today is an effort to find some issue with this prosecution, this existing prosecution. This is a person who has admitted to crimes and finding evidence of political interference, a very serious charge. So much of what we saw today honed in on a conversation, the testimony honed in on a conversation that one of today's witnesses was involved in which Mr. Shapley heard Mr. Weiss to say that he was denied special counsel status. That account had been contradicted by the U.S. Attorney Weiss, who has reiterated several times that he had full authority to bring any charges in any district and had received assurances from the Department of Justice that if he needed special attorney status, not counsel, but rather attorney status to bring those charges, it would be granted. So we are left here with 2 possible options for this story. That either Mr. Weiss, who was appointed by President Donald J. Trump and trusted by Attorney General Barr, also serving under Trump, was lying to protect the Biden administration, or he respectfully disagreed with the charges that today's 2 witnesses wanted to bring as professionals in their professional opinion. Disagreement over charges is not uncommon. The IRS Criminal Tax Counsel attorneys have disagreed in charging decisions, as we heard here today, 90% of the time. And in this particular case, reviewing attorneys at IRS and the tax division raised issues with the proposed charges. And the witnesses described how Mr. Weiss expressed some concerns about the charges. In fact, in some of the testimony we saw, Mr. Shapley recognized with regard to at least one of the charges which he himself recommended he could, and I am quoting from testimony, quote, see some issues with that would preclude it from being charged. Now, I understand why the 2 witnesses who testified here today are disappointed after 5 years of investigation. I believe you all are honorable, serving professionals, truly. And that Mr. Weiss disagreed with this analysis of facts. There was absolutely frustration that to not, quote, have a seat at the table, that Mr. Weiss made his decision about how to charge in this case, and he did charge. And that was a decision that he, as the U.S. attorney in charge of the case, was empowered to make. The question, though, I believe, that is very important to address is why we are holding these hearings today, despite what we have seen as deliberate lobbying for this hearing by a political candidate, Donald J. Trump. What we also saw today was the revival of certain conspiracy theories around Ukraine, first promoted by Rudy Giuliani during Trump's first impeachment in 2019 and his reelection campaign. We did not bring that up. That was first brought up by the Republican side that required addressing here today. Chairman Comer started this hearing by asking these witnesses about Burisma, and other members of the committee again raised the specter of these debunked conspiracy theories. It has been debunked time and time again, including by Trump's own Department of Justice. But that being said, this is the problem with bringing these conspiracy theories into this committee. They beget more. It does not stop. And today we have gotten a new conspiracy theory, one that requires us to believe that David Weiss, a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, trusted by Trump-appointed Attorney General Barr, has somehow been complicit in abetting and concealing a deep state conspiracy to protect Hunter Biden on behalf of the Biden administration when they were selected by Donald Trump. This is a theory which has apparently been proven unsuccessful, given that Hunter Biden is now criminally charged and facing sentencing by a Trump-appointed judge. Today also marked a new low when pornographic images were paraded in this hearing room. Chairman Comer, last October, you told Time magazine that you were not interested in the sordid details of Hunter Biden's life. You were quoted as saying, quote, "That's counter to a credible investigation," and I agree. Sadly, that is a reflection of how low some individuals here have been willing to go in their efforts to attack the president and his family. And frankly, I don't care who you are in this country. No one deserves that. It is abuse. It is abusive. If Republicans truly want to get to the fact here, and they want to understand why Mr. Weiss decided to charge Hunter Biden the way he did, let's hear from Mr. Weiss. But until then, we must move on from these theories and focus on the issues that matter to the American people, like ending the scourge of gun violence that is plaguing our country, confronting and combating the climate crisis, and standing up for our constitutional rights, and yes, going after the enormous amount of inequity and injustice in our tax system. And with that, I yield back to the chair.
Gentlelady yields back.
Nice, Ms. Takuda from Hawaii for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The entire premise of this hearing is the erosion of the doctor-patient relationship as a result of politicians telling doctors how they should treat their patients. So let's talk about that. It is truly hypocritical that my Republican colleagues are convening a hearing on government overreach into the doctor-patient relationship when their party is literally writing the playbook across our country on how to do exactly that, all while endangering the lives of 25 million women by denying them access to abortions and forcing doctors to break their Hippocratic oath to do no harm when government denies them the ability to provide their patients with the care and treatment they need. Since the right-wing majority of the Supreme Court overturned Roe, extreme Republican lawmakers have been tripping over themselves to pass dangerous bans and restrictions, defying the will of the majority of Americans. According to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and its over 57,000 members, abortion is an essential component of women's health care. Abortion is health care. When we criminalize, excuse me, Mr. Chair, I would like the ability to answer my question line. When we criminalize health care, undermine a patient's ability, thank you very much.
Please, we'll have order, and I will expect that Ms. Takuda has her right to make her comments. Everyone will get their time.
Thank you. I hope so. When we criminalize health care, undermine a patient's ability to access health care, tell doctors how they should and should not treat their patients, we have failed. Dr. Chain, yes or no? Do abortion bans undermine and erode the doctor-patient relationship?
Yes.
Since Dobbs took effect, we have heard horrific stories of patients enduring life-threatening situations and unthinkable emotional trauma before doctors felt they could legally provide care. The far right's war on abortion is a direct attack on 1 in every 4 women in the United States that have received abortion care, and an assault and infringement on every single person's ability to obtain the health care they need in consultation with their health care providers. And these draconian bans have devastating consequences on all of our communities. Longitudinal studies have shown us that denying access to abortion care increased household poverty, subjected individuals to long-term financial distress, bankruptcies, and even evictions. Women denied this most basic health care were often more likely to stay in violent relationships, were often left raising their children alone, and in the most tragic cases, suffered serious health problems and life-threatening complications. Dr. Shane, simple yes or no, does banning basic health care, such as abortion care, harm patients?
Yes.
When abortion is banned, it severely limits a provider's ability to provide their patients with timely, high-quality access to care. It directly undermines and erodes the relationship between patients and medical professionals, and even worse, puts patients' lives at risk. Dr. Shane, do these consequences pose an even greater threat to the doctor-patient relationship than pandemic-era public health policies like COVID-19 vaccine requirements?
Yes, they absolutely do.
As we see a rise even right now in COVID cases throughout our country and even in the halls of Congress, I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to think long and hard about this subcommittee's priorities. We've spent the last 2 hours discussing baseless, hypocritical allegations of interference in the doctor-patient relationship during the pandemic. All the while, we have Republicans systemically damaging the doctor-patient relationship by criminalizing basic reproductive health care and inflicting harm on millions of women across our country. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Greene for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reichlin-Melnick, I'm not sure what country you're paying attention to, which border you're paying attention to, but for your information, there are thousands of illegal immigrants, illegal aliens being mass released onto the streets of Arizona. Isn't that right, Mr. Lines?
Yes, they recently announced yesterday that we would start seeing those in my home community of Yuma, where they're already doing it in Tucson and other border communities.
Yeah, it's not rare. It's not something that just occasionally happens. Where a few of them, excuse me, I reclaim my time, where a few of them get released. As a matter of fact, it's being reported this morning, according to the Border Patrol, there were 9,300 migrant encounters at the border in the last 24 hours. That's 45,000 encounters in the last 5 days. Mr. Borelli, can New York take on just another 45,000 more illegal aliens?
No, I think financially and due to space concerns, the inn is full.
Mr. Lines, can Arizona house some more of these people and feed them and educate them?
Right now, Tucson is now shipping some of these people back into Yuma, and Yuma does not have any facilities, nor do we have homeless shelters for these people because their facilities are full.
And if you ask any American citizen who is, by the way, we're in $33 trillion in national debt now, I don't think we can afford to pay for this. We heard Mr. Luttrell tell you, Mr. Borelli, that he doesn't want to take back the illegal aliens from New York, and Texas doesn't want them either. I have a pretty good idea. How about remain in Mexico? Mr. Borelli, would you go along with remain in Mexico?
It certainly seems like before January of 2021, this problem was a lot less significant for places like New York.
Absolutely. Remain in Mexico worked. Mr. Lines, how do you feel about illegal aliens remaining in Mexico?
We saw 1/20th of the challenge that we're seeing today because of that MPP protocol to remain in Mexico.
Seems like it works. Ms. Maliatakis, you're from New York. How do you like remain in Mexico?
I think it's a good idea. It certainly worked under the previous administration.
Yeah, it worked, but somehow under the Biden administration, this no longer works. Mr. Reichlin-Melnick, last year on April 6, 2022, you tweeted that you were at the border last week with your 97-year-old grandfather, which is really nice. It's nice to be able to spend time with your grandfather.
Should be watching today.
You said it was a lovely day out. You said you did some bird watching, drove through the mountains, and had a great afternoon. You said there was no tragedy, no invasion, just normal life, and that border communities are some of the safest in the country. Yet, in April 2022, there was a record recorded by Border Patrol of 235,000 encounters. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of the numbers, and I stand by my statements that border communities are some of the safest and best communities in the country, as I'm sure my fellow panelists would agree.
Well, the week that you were there with your grandfather on April 3rd, 2022, a 72-year-old Perry Adrian Cole was killed by an illegal alien in an 8-vehicle crash that the illegal alien caused. So do you consider that safe and good for the border communities?
It's undoubtedly a tragedy, but again, as data shows that undocumented immigrants, on average, commit fewer crimes than native-born citizens.
Like, how would 20-year-old Kayla Marie Hamilton's mother feel about that? She was raped and strangled to death by an illegal MS-13 gang member who was apprehended at the border before being released into the interior of the United States. I think her mother would disagree. I think you should also understand that in the year of 2020, the U.S. Border Patrol criminal non-citizen arrest was all the way down to 438. That's from in 2016 when Obama was president, from 12,842. I'd inform you today that we are over 12,000 again under the Biden administration. Again, that's Border Patrol criminal non-citizen arrest. Mr. Lyons, are border communities safe, lovely places with no crime and good for families and communities?
We've had 106 different countries cross into Yuma community, with 17 being from special interest countries where they've apprehended multiple criminal elements coming across the border.
Should Arizona pay for that?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Borelli, should New York pay for this?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. I yield back.
So, Mr. Dubinsky, do you know who said the following? We had thousands of members across the country who returned holiday presents because they needed cash, missed a mortgage payment, took out a short-term loan, and ran up their credit card debt because they had no paycheck for the month.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
State your point. And stop the clock for Ms. Tlaib.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that.
All government employees are going to get paid at the end of this month, and also the Democrat Party forced shutdowns on the American economy, hurting businesses,
Reclaiming order,
forcing people to lose their jobs, kids behind in school.
It's okay.
That's not a point of order.
You know what?
All right.
That's going to be not true on October 1st.
Hold on, Chair. Recognizes Ms.
Ms. Tlaib.
Tlaib.
People to be misleading the American people. We all know. I was here in 2019 when the shutdown was there for 35 days. Because you know what? You do know who said this?
I lost track of the
I know. Doreen Greenwald. She was a member of the National Treasury Employees Union. She said 150,000 workers in 35 agencies. She said this is the irresponsible 2018-19 Republican shutdown from the previous administration.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Greene from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On July 25th, 2023, Chairman Comer and I sent the Department of Justice a letter requesting information related to victims of Hunter Biden, specifically women he sexually exploited and then claimed as deductions on his taxes through his law firm. But he never paid those taxes. Not surprisingly, the Department of Justice did not respond. After the DOJ's sweetheart Hunter Biden deal fell apart, by the way, led by the special counsel David Weiss, on September 8th, 2023, Chairman Comer and I again sent a letter to the same DOJ officials asking about victims' rights issues related to Hunter Biden's sexual exploitations. DOJ once again failed to respond. Well, yesterday I found out why they don't want to talk with us. In a new email just released, by the way, from October 2020, could you please display the email? The Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, DOJ, Tax, FBI, and IRS described evidence they have related to Mann Act violations. By the way, the subject of the email says Mann Act. First, the title, Mann Act, then it's clear there are charges on the table while the Department of Justice is in hiding from meeting with me. The Department of Justice and IRS email in David Weiss's Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, the email states there are communications with trafficker number 1 and trafficker number 2, and that Hunter Biden had escorts who traveled across state lines. These women are victims, and the Department of Justice is refusing to protect their rights. Not only that, David Weiss, the now special counsel in charge of supposedly investigating Hunter Biden, has been clearly covering up Hunter Biden's crimes since before the 2020 election, which is undoubtedly election interference. David Weiss is complicit and must be removed from the special counsel. We also have more information we subpoenaed. Let me give you an even better example based on an interview with one of Hunter Biden's victims with law enforcement. It says here that the victim, Hunter Biden's victim, stated that Biden told her that his father was the vice president and asked to Google search his name. Hunter Biden's victim stated she told Biden she was not interested in Google searching his name and just wanted to be paid. Hunter Biden's victim stated that Biden then showed her a picture of his father with President Barack Obama. Don't forget his father was vice president then. Hunter Biden's victim stated after she was shown the aforementioned picture, who was the vice president of the United States with the president of the United States, Barack Obama, she became afraid. After Hunter Biden's victim left the location, she arrived back at her apartment and told her friend, who she was just with, Hunter Biden's victim stated that her friend told her, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." These women were terrified, terrified. He used his father, Hunter Biden used his father, the vice president of the United States, to threaten his victim, who he had just trafficked for sex. And the Department of Justice refuses to speak to me? Hunter Biden needs to be held accountable for his sexual exploitation of women. And we've shown more evidence. We've shown evidence. This is what it looks like. This is what Mann Act violations look like.
Mr. Chairman?
I reclaim my time.
I'd like to challenge the use of this
Hunter
exhibit
Biden
under
should
Clause
be
6
held
of Rule
accountable.
17.
It is sad that my Democrat
Point of order.
colleagues
Point of order.
pretend to care about women's rights while allowing Hunter Biden to exploit women. This is a shame. But let's talk about—
Chairman, there's a parliamentary challenge before us.
The point of
Mr.
order.
Chairman, point of order.
Who's the point? And we'll stop the clock for you, Ms. Greene.
Mr. Chairman, our colleague from Georgia has introduced before pornographic exhibits and displayed things that are really not suitable for children who might be watching. And
bathing suit's not suitable, Mr. Raskin?
Well, I'm saying I would like the member to be instructed to not introduce any pornography today, at least without running it through
A
the chair
bathing
first.
suit is not pornography,
Well, we
Mr.
can't
Raskin.
see it from down there, so you didn't make it available to the minority before you
I've
started.
seen it before. It's
Okay.
on the internet. It's everywhere.
You are submitting a naked woman's body.
This is a bathing suit. This is a bathing suit.
And it has not been clear before this committee.
right.
Glasses on. Do you wear them
Okay.
or not? It's a
I have
bathing
contacts in, thank
suit.
you.
Oh, congratulations.
All right. Chair, ask Ms. Greene to proceed.
Now let's talk about more evidence the Democrats have denied that's turned out to be true. We all know Joe Biden is the big guy. And we confirmed that Hunter Biden was lobbying his father. Here's another example that was just released yesterday. This is from a timeline from one of the IRS whistleblowers and quotes an email between Vuk Jeremic, a Serbian politician, and Hunter Biden. "Did you have a chance to talk with the big man? He's receiving my prime minister on Wednesday. Please let me know if you think that what we discussed back in D.C. can be mentioned in the meeting. My domestic strategy, how I proceed in dealing with my government, very much depends on whether it happens or not." This is a conversation between Hunter Biden and Vuk Jeremic. This is called influence peddling. This is how Hunter Biden was selling his father's political power and influence. And this is a perfect example. This is evidence right here. I'd like to remind everyone that this is the beginning of the impeachment inquiry, where we're casting a wide net and finding every single person, whether it's last administration, the administration before that, and whether it's the current administration, that has covered up the crimes of the Biden family, and we will continue pulling more evidence
54 seconds
forward.
over, Mr. Chairman.
And I'll let Mr. Goldman go over 30 seconds. So we owe you 20 seconds to Mr. Moskowitz. It's your lucky day.